Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinbart LLC, Ross Bruck, a principal of Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Pepper Hamilton LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. I am Justin. I'm here with my co-hosts Jen and Ross, and we are back for our final part of our three-part series on blockchain technology, where we are going to continue our interview with Bill Evans of Liberty Fox Technologies. Bill, what are some of your favorite use cases for blockchain technology?
Oh, well, there's a lot. Again, I'm a bit of a practicalist. My whole concept, when I go out and talk about it, I don't like to be a crypto utopian because I think that actually scares a lot of people. So I'm very much wondering what's going to happen in 3, 5, and 7 years. So my favorite use case to date is actually in the supply chain space because I think it's the biggest space to see the most change happen. There's actually a great little YouTube commercial from IBM. It's about 40 seconds long, and it just kind of runs through a couple use cases like De Beers and trying to go after their blood diamond trade and reduce it down to this is truly a De Beers for authenticity, right? But in supply chain, they make a statement in that commercial that this is a package transferred 260 times, from sender to receiver, and that sounds absurd. But when you ever make an international shipment, there's so many carriers and handlers behind the scenes, even just inside of a large company like FedEx or UPS, the fact that it goes from one truck to one facility to another building to a plane to another truck to another thing to border control over the water and everything, it is not uncommon for it to be touched by 260 points. And all of that reconciliation right now is brutally painful. The one thing that blockchain, I think, solves the best is the reconciliation process. When properly implemented amongst partners, the need to reconcile records between the two of us goes away because my system is your system is my system, and therefore if my system says that you gave me 12 items, I know that your system also says that you gave me 12 items because this system is automatically reconciling. It's not a matter of you have data and I have data, it's a matter of we have data. So that's an exciting one. The other one that I'm really a fan of, if you guys have seen the now twice romaine lettuce scare, Walmart's a huge proponent of blockchain technology. And their senior vice president has been outwardly speaking towards it. And after that second scare, they made a statement that if you're selling them leafy greens and you're not on their blockchain by September of this year, they're not going to buy from you anymore. Because they say that reconciliation process, which they already have the right to, remember, it doesn't create data that you don't have today. If you don't store the data today, the blockchain isn't going to solve the problem. But if you store the data today and it's in 47 places and you have to make phone calls, fax machines, and emails to get all of it, like in Walmart's case, what used to take them, their words, 6 days, they were able to reduce to 2 seconds. So what happens in this romaine lettuce scenario, when it takes 6 days to figure out which lettuce is dangerous, natural reaction, pull it from all the shelves. So they take all that product, they stick it in the back till they figure out where it came from and which ones are bad and which ones aren't. In the 6 days it took to figure out that only 2,000 stores were affected, you've now wasted all that product because it's no longer fit for sale. And if we can actually get that from 6 days to 2 seconds, then we can just pull it from those 2,000 stores and save millions of dollars in lost product and insurance claims.
I want my fish on the blockchain because fish on restaurant menus and in grocery stores is notorious for being mislabeled. Mm-hmm. If I'm buying red snapper, I want to know that was red snapper that I actually got and paid for. And I think that's another example of a supply chain where that can be solved by either when it's caught or when it's tested to make sure what it is, put that on the blockchain, and then I can see that on the menu that it's guaranteed.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the trick there too is that how do you actually guarantee that the piece of fish that's on your plate lines up with the thing on the menu? So the adoption again needs to be farm to table. But if you think about it, back in the day, there was that little cute joke on the dollar bills, like where's George, and you can see where this dollar bill has been. The same thing could apply there. If the retailer was really like a big proponent of I swear that this is red snapper, go ahead and scan the barcode, they could do something cute, like put a little thing on the plate that says this is that fish, go ahead and scan it. You can see the whole history of where it came from and everything. But again, they have to expose that to you. So some retailers are looking at like, oh, well, if we say that our oranges are organic, we already put stickers on them anyway. What if there's a QR code on that sticker? And if the end user really wanted to, they could just like scan that and see, oh, this orange came from Florida 12 days ago.
But then again, that doesn't solve everything, because someone who is acting nefariously could just replace a sticker.
You're absolutely never going to be able to solve that human aspect. There's nothing that you can do to stop me from going in the back office and changing stickers on pallets. But the truth is that there's so much money to be saved and earned by doing this properly that the nefarious aspect represents a much smaller portion of the pie. And that's still going to be there no matter what.
From a regulatory perspective, is there anything in place to help maintain the trust within the blockchain and to make sure that, or to penalize people if they are acting nefariously?
Sure. So one of the interesting things about a blockchain is the fact that it's immutable, right? So I can't stop you from putting bad data on the blockchain, but I can stop you from covering it up later. There's no way for you to go back and change data. So if you were to record your books in a cooked fashion on the blockchain to be shared with your partners and regulators, and then when they come in for audit, you're like, oh man, I got to go clean those up. You can't. You can only add new records to represent changes to those records, but the entire history is there. As far as to create trust in the blockchain, especially in public blockchains, the way that they work is you have many different nodes that are all sharing that data universally. So for a nefarious actor to come in and actually manipulate a blockchain, they have to compromise 51% of the nodes. It works on a simple democracy. So all these nodes that are working together, hundreds of thousands a lot of times, for a hacker to take over and manipulate that network, they'd have to compromise over 50,000 computers at exactly the same time to manipulate that blockchain. And even if they were able to accomplish that, for them to be able to go back and retroactively change all that data to get what they're trying to accomplish is extremely difficult to do. Now, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, because less popular blockchains that don't have that kind of support have been hacked with that capacity. There is a cryptocurrency called Ethereum Classic, not to be confused with the actual Ethereum. And Ethereum Classic does not have as much computing power protecting it. So hackers were able to actually implement 51% more power than the network already had and take control of the network. But on your larger cryptocurrencies that are better supported, that is very, very, very difficult to do, to the point being that the cost of doing so would actually be higher than what you could steal.
But there could be tremendous downsides to it. I mean, I'm thinking from a disinformation perspective, right? Somebody could put out a lot of false information on a blockchain and perpetuate a false narrative, and while they could ultimately be caught, there could be tremendous damage done before they're caught.
Well, see, this also comes down to, though, the minimum viable environment, because let's just go through the supply chain scenario. Say I'm the shipper in the middle that moves product from China to California. I only have the right to manipulate the narrative that I'm responsible for along the way, and I cannot change what happened before. So the logistics company that loaded it onto my vessel before it got shipped, they've already supplied their part of the narrative. And the company who's going to receive the information or the product on the other side in California, they're going to write their part of the narrative. So even if I were to try to manipulate the story in between, it's still going to have to connect on both ends so that it lines up with both parties on either side.
So I'm thinking of Ross's fish on his plate at his restaurant. So let's say the fish comes over from wherever, Japan, and it gets onto a boat, and somebody records in the blockchain that I put the fish in a freezer from X time to Y time, when in fact it was sitting out on the deck the whole time.
Fair point.
Right, so there's misinformation going into the blockchain, and while the next block will be accurate information, that fish may have gone bad during that time period and infected many people, and we're not going to know about. There's no regulatory way to know that.
That's a perfectly valid point. And a lot of what people are looking to do now that they're seeing all this, and believe it or not, this is already something that happens in the logistics and supply chain space, is the Internet of Things, which plays well with blockchain technology but they're already doing this anyway. Like, instead of having a person walking around with a clipboard looking at the refrigerator and writing the temperature down every hour, there's a thermometer in there that they cannot manipulate that is recording to its own database already. So instead of recording to a database, it would just record to the blockchain. They would have to intentionally go in there and manipulate that thermostat in some capacity. And again, they can't do it retroactively. So if I were to use this, and I know the fish was in that container because the container is sealed. Mind you, a lot of times that happens. Like, the container comes in on a logistics vehicle, it's sealed and ready from customs. So when it gets onto my ship, I can't take it out and leave it out on the deck, right? But that thermostat's in there, self-powered, recording to a database through cellular networks already. Instead, it now records to the blockchain. So now when I get to the other side, I realize that refrigeration unit failed halfway through. In the current system, I may have the ability to go into my database and fake that data so that everything looks good. In the blockchain, I cannot. If I catch it early on, or I know it's going to fail and I'm going to nefariously manipulate that thermostat, sure, again, can't stop that person who's being proactively nefarious. But you can stop the person from being retroactively nefarious.
So it sounds like the solution is blockchain on top of blockchain on top of blockchain, right? All of these different systems working together to make sure that they're all working together.
Well, those systems working together is actually the blockchain. So in the past, what you're saying is database and database and database, but instead of us all having different database, we all have one blockchain. And that's the benefit. But to your point, I don't believe there's ever going to be just one blockchain. Like, Walmart has created this food safety blockchain. There's also another one called the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance. So there's going to be different blockchains for different use cases, but they will each be able to tell a beginning to end story.
You mentioned the Internet of Things. Could you briefly describe that a little further?
Internet of Things is nothing more than many devices that are, smaller or simpler than a computer being able to record data and react to data sent to them. And they're actually prime candidates for things like blockchain technology. In fact, earlier I mentioned a coin called IOTA. The IoT of IOTA is Internet of Things. It's a coin designed around that aspect. And so simplifying things and allowing things to be able to react, like, for example, something as simple as a clock telling you that it's going to die, that is Internet of Things, right? A refrigerator telling you that your milk is going to spoil. That's Internet of Things. It might be a little drafty, and you may say, I don't know if we need that, but anytime a device that was previously considered dumb is now smart is Internet of Things. And allowing those devices to communicate directly to the blockchain on their own behalf creates a source of record or provenance for whatever asset they're in charge of at the time.
So what is the interoperability of blockchains communicating with other blockchains right now?
It depends on what blockchain technology you're working with and which one you're trying to integrate with, but that complexity would really come down to the same as right now two different systems. Like, if I have Oracle and you have SAP making those two talk together, it wouldn't be much different than if I have an Ethereum consortium and you have another one like Hyperledger. But at the same time, the question there is, why do you need two separate blockchains to talk together? Because if they're both serving the same purpose, there's value in them both joining together and one being defunct and one taking over. So the Blockchain Transportation Alliance, for example, the one that I mentioned, that's not a scenario where like FedEx has their own blockchain and CSX has their own. There's hundreds of companies all in the logistics space that agreed, because again, the minimum viable environment, the more that you contribute to it, the more valuable it is. If you think about it like the internet back in the day, there was separate private internet. It's like you went on AOL, you put in a keyword, you didn't type a URL, right? And you went into different websites, and I went into a different ISP provider, and I got on web crawl, and it was different. And they realized that everybody having different semi-private internets was not as valuable as there just being one that had everything. And the same thing applies with this blockchain technology. There will be many to start, but over time, I think they'll homogenize into the use cases that they're designed for.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle to mass adoption of blockchain technology?
It depends, again, on the industry, but I think that the biggest hurdle in a lot of industries is the fear from the middlemen. So if you think about in the supply chain space, almost everybody has something to benefit from this, this visibility on the blockchain. But there's other industries, like I mentioned earlier, like property, for example, where many people would be cut out of that process. If you look at one of the slides I was talking about, I have this thing called Credit Card Chaos and Money Transfer Madness. And if I wanted to wire you money, even just across Philadelphia, there's up to 14 different parties involved. Why? Why does there have to be 14 parties involved? So companies like Western Union, for example, they see that coming, and they know that there's so many different parties involved that they're trying to cut it out ahead of time. They're trying to preempt it. So any industry where the disruption will cause, loss of jobs or loss of roles in a transaction, those are very resistant. Other ones where the parties are more likely to benefit than be disadvantageous to them, they're very, very much on the adoptive side.
If a law firm came to you and said, we want to put all of our clients' documents on a single blockchain, what would your response be? Would it be, that doesn't make sense in terms of one individual firm doing it? You need wider adoption. You need multiple firms on the same blockchain, or in a private ledger for just that one firm's documents? Does it make sense?
Sure, and my first question is, well, what problem are you trying to solve by doing that? Because the truth is, if you have full control over the data, like let's just say you are responsible for the beginning to the end, then that's not necessarily a use case for blockchain. Now, if you need to move those documents around to other parties, and they're also going to use that blockchain with you, then it becomes more and more and more viable. But for example, blockchain in and of itself is not necessarily the best technology for large data storage. It's actually very poor at that. It's mostly important for sensitive data storage. So if you were to start putting up tons of gigabytes of files, you might find that the way that you're storing it on the blockchain is much more costly than a traditional data source, because every node that secures that blockchain is storing an entire copy. So for example, if you had 100 gigabytes of client documents and you have 10 nodes storing that 100 gigabytes, you're now storing that much. You're storing 1,000, you're storing a terabyte of data when it's really only 100 gig, and so on and so on and so on, because every node stores a copy, and that in itself is the security of a blockchain. So hybrid scenarios where the most sensitive information you put on the blockchain, the most sensitive documents you put on the blockchain, but the ones that are less sensitive you put in a traditional data store, and then what you do is you store what's called a hash on the blockchain to confirm that that file has not been manipulated. So that hash is much, much smaller than the actual document itself, and therefore the next time you open the document you can confirm that it hasn't been manipulated. You cannot stop it from being manipulated, but you will know that it has or hasn't been, and then you can go into whatever recovery process you have in that scenario. So in the electronic medical record scenario that I had mentioned before, the clients that I'm working with, they're looking at storing your basic biography information, like, height, weight, width, all that kind of stuff, definitely on the blockchain. But if you had an MRI or a CAT scan, that would be extremely expensive to store on the blockchain. And therefore, they would store it in a traditional storage medium and store that hash up there to make sure that it hasn't been manipulated or corrupted in any way. So hybrid approaches are very common.
From a technology perspective, what do you think lawyers need to be most aware of in this space?
Well, I mean, this is a conversation I've had many times, and I think the biggest thing from the law perspective is how these smart contracts are evolving. I've mentioned in the past, that right now, it's a software development process. You have to write in a special computer language to write these smart contracts, but we are literally taking that English contract that a lawyer wrote and transcribing it into code. And as such, when it's written as code, it's as if you transferred a contract from English to Spanish. It needs to be reviewed again. So I think that there's a future where you either have lawyer auditors that understand software development and are reviewing that smart contract, or even further, I think you could see a future where you have a lawyer software developer, a lawyer who actually knows how to write that smart contract. The English version that you write on paper becomes your draft, and the smart contract that you actually end up transcoding is the real thing.
So you talked about uses in the medical space for blockchain technology. How is it secured in the blockchain, personal medical information secured in the blockchain to prevent hacking of information?
Certainly, and even beyond just hacking, like why is it just visible to everybody, right? So as I mentioned before, there's three primary silos in the blockchain space: public, permissioned, and private. To put your electronic medical records on a public blockchain would probably be a very bad idea, because it's the same as publishing on the internet. If you had like www.billevans.com and up there was everything about my entire medical history, that's the equivalent of sticking it on a public blockchain. Separately of that, you have what's called permissioned and private. It's getting slowly more progressive into the private space. There are specialized blockchains like Hyperledger that are designed for that. And a private blockchain would be a scenario where there is a central group of nodes that can determine and allow other nodes to join and contribute. So it's not fully decentralized anymore, because there's still a voting party that allows new nodes to come in. A permission blockchain is a bit of a hybrid scenario where the entire blockchain is potentially visible to the world, but some of the data in there is encrypted. So I can see that you have an electronic medical record stored, but I can't read it. It's completely encrypted. And then you can decide who is able to decrypt it. So you know that you're safe in the sense that that record has been replicated everywhere and therefore is secured by that blockchain. But you can decide, okay, only myself, my spouse, and my doctor have the right to view this. And you can go so far as to say, all right, you know what, I don't like that doctor anymore, I'm going to a new doctor, I want to revoke access to my records and share it. Because the one thing that the consumer doesn't have today is access to the records. If I asked you where all of your medical records are, you probably don't even know. Some are with, a childhood doctor that may or may not even be practicing anymore. Some are with some specialists that you've been to, some are with your primary care physician, but most people in this world have never seen their entire medical record, and nor have any of your physicians. So that's a real scenario that they're trying to work towards, and the permissioning of that allows you to share and control how much you want to share with everybody.
So if I wanted to grant permission to my medical records, how would I do that?
So as these systems are built in a permission blockchain, you would have what's called a private key, the equivalent of like a password into your account at the bank, or a key to your lockbox, etc. And with that private key, you can create sub-keys that are allowed to access certain pieces of the information. So you would have a master password or private key. You can go in and say, okay, I'm going to be going to Dr. Bill, and I need to show him the last 5 years of my medical history, so I can go in and select that, generate a key for him that's able to unlock that data.
So let's say that I become incapacitated or I die. Are there any limitations as to who can get that key?
Certainly. That is a real problem, and it's happened. Millions and millions of dollars of cryptocurrency are stuck on the blockchain because people have passed away without sharing those private keys. One of the benefits of it is that there is no central authority. One of the disadvantages is that there's no central authority. So, right now you could go on your bank and have some kind of like baseball 1 as your password. I don't recommend that, but you could. And if you forget it, you can hit forgot password and they can help you. In a cryptocurrency and blockchain space, there's nobody to help you if you don't use some kind of a central authority. So if you actually stored your $100 worth of Bitcoin in a wallet and you lost that password, it's the equivalent of you having lost it in the street. Maybe you'll find your wallet, maybe you won't. So it's up to you to be diligent and store that private key. And if you're fearful of your own ability to do so, then you go into a central authority and have them store your private key so that you can have a much more standardized password. So, for example, my client that I'm potentially working with on this electronic medical record implementation, they would be that partially centralized authority in the sense that it is a permissioned blockchain that anybody can see, but they're going to store your private key for you so that you can have a much simpler key that can be recovered, which is what all these exchanges do. If you have money in Gemini or Coinbase or any of them, they're storing the real private key for you as securely as possible, so that you can have a much simpler password.
Let's talk worst case scenario then. So somebody comes to you and says, Bill, I know my spouse did something with crypto or blockchain, and I don't really know because I didn't ever pay attention. Can you help me search? Granted, a lot of that with the private key, it's going to be like you lost it on the street. But what would be your process to at least try?
That is really tough. The first thing you would want to do is go through all their electronic assets, their laptops, computers, anything, and hopefully they've disclosed that with their spouse, just like you'd hope to say, like, hey, I have some money in Amazon. If I die, don't forget to go cash it out, right? So, it's up to you to have some due diligence there. If you don't know their wallet ID, because, again, it's not tied back to their real name in the world, then you're completely lost. If you know their wallet ID, and you have some variation of what that passcode could have been, there's maybe a faint hope for you, but the way that a private key works, it's not something that person would have ever put in. So a lot of people put like their kids' names and birth dates or something. You have no control over what that private key is, so you can't guess like, oh, it's Shannon Janelle Shannon 12. Like it's not. It's never going to be something that you think that person knew. So, I'll put it this way. The original creator or creators of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, has millions of Bitcoins sitting in the original accounts that were ever created. We can all see that they sit there. People have been trying since the last 10 years of Bitcoin existing with supercomputers to figure out those passwords, and nobody's ever stolen any of those funds.
So I think the advice here for attorneys is talk to your clients while they're living to share that information, make sure people know about it.
My password is stored in multiple locations. My parents know where it is, my wife knows where it is, and my financial advisor knows where it is, so that way if God forbid something happened, multiple people know how to help my family recover those assets.
I think it's also important to note that even if somebody dies and there is a suspicion that they had cryptocurrency stored in multiple locations, a deeper analysis needs to take place on who can properly try to access that information through their devices and software applications.
Sure, and keep in mind too that if they were a more casual investor, they probably kept it on an exchange like Coinbase, and with a proper death certificate and things like that, they can help you recover those assets. The scenario that I just described would be the scenario where that particular person chose to be fully in charge of their private key like myself. And then if you take on that responsibility, then you need to make sure that you have backup plans for it.
Are you finding that when you're helping clients set these up, are they even thinking about that issue? What happens if they die or become incapacitated?
No, they're not, and that's why we work with a really great cybersecurity firm that's focused primarily on blockchain and cryptocurrency cybersecurity. For any client that intends, that is going to be transacting on the blockchain with large volumes of assets, I always highly recommend they work with a company like that so that they know what their backup plans are.
So now for users who are storing their cryptocurrency and their private keys on a public exchange, there's a risk associated with that too. Recently it was reported that the Chinese-based cryptocurrency exchange Binance was hacked, and the company reported that over 7,000 Bitcoins were stolen, and at the time of the hack those were valued at around roughly 41 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in that scenario, that's the disadvantage of a decentralized space that you've chosen to re-centralize, right? It's no different at that point than somebody hacking into Wells Fargo or PNC Bank or any of those. By putting your private key back in their hands, you're now trusting them with it. And as soon as their database is compromised, that hacker now has access to all those private keys to then go drain the accounts. So, there's a trade-off there, right? You're protecting yourself from yourself, but you're vulnerable now to the world. Whereas in my scenario, I am protected from the world, but vulnerable to myself. So you just have to figure out what scenario you're most comfortable with. But yes, as long as we have exchanges who are in control of your private keys, you will always have that vulnerability. There are some exchanges, though, that are trying to create the best of both worlds, called distributed exchanges, where you have the ability to have your cryptocurrency in a centralized location, but you also have the ability to maintain your private key and the exchange does not have it. So you still are at risk to yourself, but you're not necessarily at risk to hackers. It's important to note that although many exchanges have been hacked, going all the way back to the biggest one back in the day being the Mt. Gox hack of 2014, Bitcoin itself and most cryptocurrencies themselves have never actually been hacked. Nobody's ever actually gone into Bitcoin itself and stolen funds. They've always gone through an exchange that was compromised or a user whose password was compromised. So when these exchanges get hacked like that, a lot of times the cryptocurrencies themselves get, the bad rap. When you think about it, the statement I just made is like saying, yes, banks have been robbed, but nobody's ever faked a $100 bill. Well, we know that people have faked a $100 bill, but there actually is no way to fake a Bitcoin. And that, to this day, 10 years of an active system worth hundreds of billions of dollars at this point, there's never been a counterfeit Bitcoin ever minted.
So along the train of thought about issues with crypto exchanges, do you have any thoughts about the Canadian crypto exchange Quadringa CX? And this exchange really came up in the news in the early part of this year when it was uncovered that the owner of the exchange, the founder, Gerald Cotton, died unexpectedly in December of 2018 in his early 30s on a trip to India. And he died holding the private keys and the information to access those keys, which consisted of hundreds of accounts worth millions and millions of dollars of clients' assets.
So there is some speculation that he's still alive. The sad thing is that that's poor business practice, and that's not fair to the overall blockchain and cryptocurrency space. dead or alive, for an entire company to exist holding millions of dollars of assets, and the only contingency plan is that the owner has all the passwords, is just poor, and it's a shame. That's why, it's very hard, but when you get into crypto trading and you look at exchanges, you want to look at exchanges that have very high reputations. You want to look at exchanges who actually have on their About Us how they store their keys, what they're doing. If you were to go on Coinbase, for example, they explain that many of their private keys are physically backed up in a real vault, in like a bank-style vault. And they actually describe their recovery process in detail on their website to give you that comfort. But there are many exchanges that just pop up out of the blue and people start trading on them having no clue how that business operates. I would say trading cryptocurrency on an exchange like that is no different than investing in a penny stock, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And again, that's just a shame because it was poor business practice, not well implemented.
So we won't hold you to any numbers, but what do you think an average range of costs are for small, medium, and large companies who are considering adopting blockchain technology?
So just like any software project, it has everything to do with the scope of that project. So if you were to go call up IBM or Accenture or somebody like them and say, I want to build my own blockchain from scratch, I'm going to create my own consortium, you're easily in the millions of dollars of cost, easily. But if you're trying to join somebody else's blockchain, it has everything to do with how was their blockchain designed and how complex is your system to integrate. And that can be, in the low to mid 6 figures down into the 5 figures and, potentially even cheaper. It has everything to do with just the complexity of that integration.
Do you have any advice for business owners considering adopting this technology?
I would say the most important thing is to be educated in the space because, like I said, more often than not, it's something that they will need to adopt someday, but it's not ready yet. I'm a huge advocate of it, but I also don't want to see people go bleeding edge and get cut. So I just recommend that everybody make an intelligent decision to either move forward or don't, but do so after doing some research.
Do you have any final thoughts for our audience on either blockchain or crypto?
No, it's just overall, it's a really interesting space. I've been fascinated by it for years, and I'm always curious to see what everybody's doing and what everybody's looking at and where the market's going. So I encourage people to be excited about a new technology. Don't be fearful because it's just a technology. It's not going to go rip the world apart and change things. But it is something that where it's a good fit, it's going to make big differences, and where it's not, it'll make very little difference at all. So just to be aware of what's coming, know how it affects you, and just like any technology, don't wait too long to get into it, but don't jump in too early either, and try to find that happy medium.
So how can our audience members contact you, Bill?
Our website is www.libertyfoxtech.com. Liberty like the Liberty Bell, Fox like the animals, tech spelled TECH. You're certainly welcome to reach out to me there or on LinkedIn. I do try to do blog posts from time to time. But I'm happy to talk and reach out to anybody who's interested in furthering the conversation.
Excellent. Just real quick, is there any significance behind the meaning and the word of Liberty Fox Technologies for you?
Sure. It's just a fun pun for me. I grew up in an area of Northeast Philadelphia called Fox Chase, so that's where the fox comes from. And the Liberty is actually a little ode to some unknown history. Many years ago, Northeast Philadelphia tried to secede from Philadelphia. They wanted to become their own city, and they were going to call themselves Liberty City. And Philadelphia said, no, you can't do that. But they tried. So it's an ode to a little-known fact about Northeast Philadelphia and the fact that I grew up in Fox Chase.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Bill. We've really enjoyed having you on our show.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.